that's for sure. Never have to close the door. Been a long time, a year before, and I'm missing you so bad.
Hi guys, welcome back to Exmo Lex. Just a couple of things before we get to the meat and potatoes of today's video. First of all, this is Muppet. I currently have her on my lap, and so, you know, if you hear some little noises, that's probably her. If you want to know more about her, I'm going to put a video about her on my other channel. I'll put the link in the description. Also, my kids are playing right now. Usually when I'm filming videos, so you're probably going to hear them in the background. Usually when I'm filming videos, I will give them tablets and stuff to keep them occupied, but today that's not an option, so you might hear some background noises. I apologize in advance for that, but you know, the content is still the content, so I hope you guys can look past that. Today we're going to start reading this book together. This was given to me by one of my subscribers when I did my meetup in Boise, Idaho, and I decided that I wanted to read it for a video. I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to do that, if I just wanted to sort of like look through and go, you know, read bits and pieces of it. I also wasn't sure how to handle the name of this, and I have read probably the first like 5 pages. That's when I decided that I wanted to just go ahead and read the entire book and talk about it as we go. But it uses this term probably like every other sentence, if not more. So I wasn't sure how to handle that. I talked to my Instagram followers about it. I did some of my own research, and I decided that I don't want to read that word aloud in the video. So I think what I'm gonna do is every time that word comes along, I'm just not going to say it. I'm gonna try to make the video and the reading of this book flow in the best way that I possibly can while still avoiding using that term. We're also not gonna get through this entire book in one sitting, so this will probably be multiple parts. So hopefully you guys are up for lots of content. Mormonism and the by John J. Stewart, supplement by William E. Barrett. Copyright 1960, and this book was printed in 1967. Before we get started, for anybody who is unfamiliar with Mormonism's history regarding the priesthood ban, I think it was about from, I want to say that late 1840s, maybe early 1850s, until 1978, the church did not allow Black people to enter the LDS temple. Hey there, Editing Lexi here. I just wanted to clarify that Black people could go into the temple and do baptisms for the dead, but they could not be sealed in the temple or to receive the priesthood. Now, obviously, by the time this book was written in 1960, you know, that had started to garner a lot of criticism, and that is why the book was written. As we know now, the church ended up reversing that policy in 1978. I also do want to mention that this book, while I haven't finished the whole thing, I can pretty much guarantee it contains very racist things. So if that is triggering for you in any way, if this is not going to be good for your mental health, I encourage you to click away onto a different video. With that said, let's get started. Mormonism and the Chapter 1. There is nothing in the doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about which any member need feel any shame, apology, or embarrassment. Okay, right off the bat here, there is nothing in the church that anybody should feel any shame or apology or embarrassment about. Really? There are so many things, particularly back when this was written in 1960, that I can think of that we should all be ashamed about. It's funny reading this with hindsight, knowing that, you know, less than a couple of decades later, this priesthood ban would be revoked. I mean, I wonder what he thought about that, or if he was alive then. Perhaps in the individual failings and weaknesses of some who profess to be members there may be cause, but not in the gospel itself. Okay, I might end up stopping like every sentence. So he's saying that individual people have failings and weaknesses, and also he says that these are people who profess to be members. It's interesting that he would say that, because when I think about my time in the church and the things that I'm embarrassed about, those are all things that were put forward by like apostles and prophets, not just lay people, lay members of the church, or people professing to be members. Those are the people who have created, who sustain the church, who keep the church going. As the Apostle Paul said, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth." You know, we can have an interesting discussion too about how Mormons often like to claim that policy and doctrine and the gospel are not all the same thing. I get a lot of Mormons complaining if I bring up things like the priesthood ban, who are like, that was just policy, not doctrine. It's not part of the gospel. And I'm like, where do you draw the line exactly? It's different for everybody and it's different for everything. It seems like they just move the goalpost around a lot depending on whatever suits them at the time. Let's keep going. Yet, because of the popular beliefs and traditions of the world, there are at least 2 points of doctrine and history of this church about which many LDS themselves, to say nothing of many non-members, feel ill at ease or critical. One of these is its doctrine regarding the you think? It makes me wonder, and I have often wondered this about my own family members who were alive at the time, like my parents or my grandparents more like. Did they feel ill at ease? I hope that they did. I hope that they found that icky, you know? I would like to believe that if I had been alive at the time that I would have felt ill at ease about it, that I would have felt embarrassed and ashamed and had questions. I wonder how many LDS people really felt that way. I wonder how many felt that way but felt too scared to tell people that they felt that way because they didn't want to be seen as an apostate. I do remember growing up and hearing about people who would say like, oh, when the priesthood ban was lifted, it was just such an amazing feeling and stuff. And I'm like, okay, so that means that you must have been uncomfortable with it in some way if you were relieved and happy when it changed, right? In modern day, the church changed from being 3-hour time period to being 2 hours, and how many Mormons were so overjoyed about that. But when you think about it, that just means that they didn't want to be at church for 3 whole hours because church is boring and uncomfortable or whatever. So it makes me think, back then, people were relieved and were happy that it changed. And I'm like, so that means that people were unhappy with the way that it was. Does nobody sort of think about the fact that the church was unsatisfactory? God's only true church on the face of the earth that is run by a prophet of God who speaks for God, and it wasn't satisfactory, we didn't like it, and we're happy that it changed. It's just interesting to think about. If we properly understood this doctrine and the reasons for it, we would not feel critical of it. Okay, so I'm assuming he's going to tell us all the reasons why we shouldn't feel critical. Dying to hear what those could be. And ye shall know the truth, taught Jesus, and the truth shall make you free. We would become free of any misgivings about these teachings and readily proclaim to the world what they are and why. Interesting, because this did end up changing. But okay, let's keep going. Briefly, the LDS policy on is this: and other people with blood can become members of the church and through righteous works receive patriarchal blessings, enter the temple to receive baptism for the dead, become heirs to the celestial kingdom, and otherwise partake of many blessings afforded worthy members of the church. But they cannot be ordained to the priesthood, nor are they eligible for marriage in an LDS temple, and none should not intermarry. 1960, this was written, and they were still saying that out loud. Wow. This is going to be kind of difficult to get through. In regard to this LDS policy on, members of the church face 3 alternatives. 1, the apologizers for the church say that it is old-fashioned, outmoded on this point, prejudiced. I would say that many members of the church are that way today. I would say that, you know, when I see apologists or when I see Mormons on the internet debating in my comment sections or whatever, most of them do recognize that, yes, this is old-fashioned and prejudiced and racist and it was wrong. And then they usually have like some sort of justification as to why it was okay that it happened. Sort of. It's not like okay, but the church is still true. You know what I mean? 2, confess that we do not know the reason for this policy, although we accept it, that we have a blind faith in it. Yeah, I've definitely seen that as well. And that goes for many other things with the church. If the people don't agree with it or it doesn't make sense or they don't have a good answer, they'll usually say, we're just following the prophet because we know that he's a prophet of God and we have faith and we'll be blessed for our faith even if we don't understand it. 3, proclaim that this is correct and reasonable doctrine, that it is tenable, that we have no reason either to apologize for it nor evade questions about it. We must then explain the reasons for it and show that it is consistent with the rest of LDS doctrine. Gross, okay. The first 2 alternatives are totally unacceptable to me. To me, the first one is the best one. Absolutely, we should apologize for the church. I'm embarrassed that I ever believed in the church. I agree. It's old-fashioned. It's prejudiced. The second one, confess that we don't know the reason, but we have blind faith. Yuck. Don't have blind faith in things. The third one is the worst one. Acting like there is nothing wrong with it. We shouldn't have to apologize for anything. This is God's true church and this is how it's supposed to be and whatever. Okay, let's keep going. If we are apologizers for the church on this point, then we admit in effect that all gospel doctrine is not sound. We say in effect that either the original position of the church was incorrect on this matter, or if it was correct, that we as a church do not enjoy continuous revelation and thus have become outdated on this doctrine. Okay, this is interesting because I actually agree with that. It's funny to say that because I wouldn't think that I would agree with anything that this person said, but I actually do agree with that. When people are in my comment sections and when people are making their own blog posts and things like that, that say things like the church is wrong or was wrong or this prophet or that prophet was wrong or I don't agree with this specific doctrine. I even have family members who are kind of more nuanced Mormons who are the same way, who don't agree with everything the church does, who are like apologizers, as he says. And I totally agree with what he says when we are apologizers for the church and we say things like, you know, I don't agree with that, I don't believe in that, I think that's wrong or racist or prejudiced or bad. We say in effect that either the original position of the church was incorrect on this matter, yes, or if it was correct, that we as a church do not enjoy continuous revelation and that we have become outdated on this doctrine. Interesting. If we deny continuous revelation in the church, then we place ourselves in much the same position as all other so-called Christian sects and isolate ourselves from God, the head of our church. Yeah, so the church, one of their main selling points that they like to tout is that they have continuous revelation because they have a living prophet on the earth today. And so by saying that, he's basically saying that if you are apologizing for the church and saying that we don't agree with the doctrine or whatever, then you're saying we're the same as all other churches because they don't receive revelation today, they don't have a modern prophet or whatever. If we accept the second alternative, that of blind faith in the doctrine, something that we do not understand but do not question, then we place ourselves in much the same position as churches that favor blind faith, and we find ourselves having to evade rather than face issues. I would say that there were things in the church that I had this viewpoint on that I didn't understand or didn't agree with, that I would in effect say, like, I will find out when I die. I'll understand when I go to heaven. God has a plan for me and God works in mysterious ways. God's ways are not our ways, etc., etc. But LDS theology teaches that our faith should be an intelligent faith, not a blind faith. For instance, we read in the book of Moses, "After many days an angel of the Lord appeared unto Adam, saying, Why dost thou offer sacrifices unto the Lord? And Adam said unto him, I know not, save the Lord commanded me. And then the angel spake, saying, This thing is the similitude of the sacrifice of the only begotten of the Father, which is full of grace and truth." From this scripture and numerous others, it can be seen that God does not wish us to be content with blind faith. He desires that we have intelligent faith and understanding. The glory of God is intelligence, observed the prophet Joseph Smith. So the true church member rules out the first two alternatives and moves to the third to proclaim that it is a correct doctrine and then explain why this is so. I wonder how long this was in print for. I can't help wondering that, just because he keeps saying things like this is correct and we should be proclaiming that it is correct and being able to explain why it is correct and why we do agree with this. But then just a few years later, it was reversed. I wonder if he will bring up anything about there being a possibility that this could be changed and what that would mean at all. So let's keep going. We must consider and give satisfaction on this problem from 5 different points of view. 1. Loyal LDS church members who deserve reassurance that all church teachings are true and just. 2. Interested investigators of Mormonism. 3. Other honest investigators of Mormonism whose acceptance of gospel truths may, as with group 2, be thwarted by their misunderstanding of this doctrine. Basically, we want people to join the church, but if people know the truth about the church, they might not want to join. So we have to be able to rationalize and explain and justify why our racist beliefs are okay so that people of any race will want to join our faith. That's just, okay. 4, at large, who are not investigators of the gospel, but are nonetheless fellow human beings and members of our society. 5, skeptics or Mormon baiters, whether inside or outside the church. I guess I would fall into the skeptics category. Category number 5. That's me. How about you? This last group, the Mormon baiters, we can dismiss in a hurry. They have already closed their mind to truth and reason. You cannot prove anything to anybody who is determined not to believe a thing. How ironic. This is very interesting to me, considering the fact that I am reading this book. We are going to go through the whole thing together. You, the watcher, if you are an ex-Mormon or a skeptic or a Mormon baiter, as you've been called, if you are that kind of person, you are interested enough to watch this video and get to this point in the book with me and try to understand this whole viewpoint. I feel like a skeptic is somebody who usually is going to have an open mind, who is going to, you know, want to find the truth. And I mean, the church definitely does teach and has taught that being a skeptic or, you know, being a scholar are not necessarily good things, because if you are learned, then you think you are wise, but really you're foolish and all this other nonsense. But it is very funny to me to just see this in here and be like, okay, so the church and this person writing this book is just assuming and expecting that anybody who doesn't believe the church is true automatically is totally unreachable, because what was it? You cannot prove anything to anybody who is determined not to believe a thing. See, I feel like that applies way more to Mormons and many religious people than it does to people who have left. Because for us, we have been at a point where we're willing to change our minds, willing to accept new information, accept facts, use logic, and change our minds. And for me, I'm still in that place where I am absolutely willing to be proven wrong. So I totally disagree with him saying they've already closed their mind to truth and reason and you can't prove anything and you can just dismiss those people. I feel like if he had a little bit more empathy for people in the position that he's talking about, he would understand that those people are doing what they believe to be right. Consider the foolishness and the hypocrisy of their position. They are denouncing the LDS Church for not allowing them to hold the priesthood, yet they claim there is no authenticity nor value in the priesthood. So if they were really concerned about the welfare of they should be grateful that the LDS Church does not allow them to partake of such humbuggery as they deem the priesthood to be. Oh my God, this is such a stupid argument. And this is the kind of argument that I see from Mormons all the time. Like, well, you don't believe it's true anyway, so why does it matter? You don't believe that the priesthood is even a real thing, so why do you care who we allow to have it? So let's say, like, in today's perspective, women are not allowed to hold the priesthood. Like, you don't believe that the priesthood is real, so you should be happy that women don't have it because it's just, you know, fake to you anyway. That is so not the point. The point is that you are damaging people, you are hurting people by excluding them from something that they believe. You are excluding them. You are literally saying to them, God doesn't want you to be able to partake of this thing that's super, super important. So yeah, I don't believe that the priesthood is a real thing. I don't believe it at all. I don't have any sort of belief that the priesthood is or does anything. The people you are hurting are the people who believe that the priesthood is this big, important, grand gift from God that can literally heal people. These priesthood blessings can change your life. They could change the course of what's going to happen. People give priesthood blessings before like major surgeries and stuff, praying that the person will be okay. It's really not about me and what I believe. It's about the people that you're hurting when you're excluding them. I feel like that should be pretty obvious, but apparently not. On close analysis, we see that they are trying to have foisted onto them a thing that they consider to be of no worth. And I suspect that is about as much genuine interest as they have in the welfare of their objective, we see, is not justice for but persecution of the LDS Church. They are partakers of the spirit of Satan. Oh my God. I mean, I just went over this whole thing. What he is assuming is that people like me who are criticizing the LDS Church, and let's say, you know, people back in the 60s who were criticizing the LDS Church were possessed by the spirit of Satan. That's all there is to it. They have, you know, no sympathy, no empathy. They don't care about the actual people involved. All they are doing is trying to tear down the church because Satan has a hold on their mind. Let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's just take Satan out of the equation. I don't believe that there is such a thing as Satan. So let's just not even have that as part of it. People who are criticizing the church for something that is hurting people, even if I don't believe in the priesthood, people who are criticizing the church for not allowing people to have the priesthood because of the color of their skin, we are feeling empathy for those people. Even though we don't believe what they believe, we feel empathy for them. Because how horrible of a position to be in where you believe in this God who is loving and merciful, and yet he's withholding something from you because of something that is completely outside of your control. I mean, I feel like that would just be so hurtful and damaging for people. And I'm sure that there are people who felt that way. And people who in the 60s were fighting against this, they weren't doing it because Satan. They were doing it because they had empathy, because they felt for those people, because those people were hurting and they wanted that to stop. But to the other 4 groups, the conscientious church member, the investigator, and the at large, we are pleased to give an explanation of this doctrine. They are each entitled to an answer. To gain understanding on this matter, first let us consider carefully the position of the apologizer, the conscientious member of the church who feels badly about this particular doctrine. His stand is perhaps motivated by a high ideal, the ideal that all men are created equal, as Thomas Jefferson so nobly expressed it. Let us say that the apologizer believes this, and to him the LDS policy of not allowing to hold the priesthood and enjoy its attendant blessings seems to indicate that we are legislating against him, and that we are therefore taking exception to the ideal that all men are created equal. To the apologizer, it seems that we are allowing race and color prejudice to enter into gospel doctrine, that we allow the world's prejudice against to influence us. Now, these are high, noble motives and ideas that prompt these feelings of the apologizer, and he is worthy of commendation for such feelings. But in his desire to see justice done to he has failed to fully explore the matter in light of historical facts and gospel truths. Yeah, I'm very interested to hear how he's going to rationalize this, just given that that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what it was. Jefferson's idealistic declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, is consistent with LDS teachings. But where the apologizer loses his way is in forgetting that men were not created, in the proper sense of the word, at the beginning of life in this world, but rather thousands of years ago. In fact, we were co-eternal with God himself, and he created or organized us as spirit entities long before we came into this mortal world. Now here is a great eternal truth that the world at large knows little about, but members of the church know it and cannot afford to forget it. We will return to this point later. I'm a little bit confused about where he was going with this. Maybe he will get to more of it later, but is he saying that all men were not created equal because we weren't created on the earth, we were created before? I actually do wonder. I have a couple of other books that were written around the same time period that justify the entire priesthood ban by the fact that the people who wrote the books, namely Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith, believed that in the pre-mortal worlds, there were some people who were less valiant, and then they were born on Earth with darker skin. And so they have a curse placed upon them, and therefore they can't have the priesthood. So I do wonder if him bringing up the whole, we were created and organized as spirits long before we came to the mortal world, has something to do with that. I guess we'll see. And supposing that the LDS policy in not allowing to hold the priesthood was the result of or influenced by world prejudice against and especially by the fact that we're slaves in America at the time the gospel was restored, in believing this to be so, the apologizer not only shows an ignorance of historical facts, but he reveals a personal doubt in the validity of the inspiration and teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith and his successors in the presidency of the church. He also betrays a lack of reasoning. A careful study of the life and teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith would show the fallacy of this supposition. Let us consider this for a moment. The prophet's whole life shows beyond doubt that he was not afraid of persecution, nor public censure, nor ridicule. He openly taught his convictions of truth no matter how much trouble and hardship it brought upon him. He even gave his life rather than yield to so much pressure or to compromise on truth. You could literally say this about so many people with so many different belief systems. What about David Koresh and the Branch Davidians? They did the same exact thing. What about Jim Jones and the People's Temple? They did the same thing. Were all of their beliefs true just because they didn't yield to the persecution, just because they literally died for their beliefs? Does it make it true? Absolutely not. To suppose that he would curry the favor of the world by manifesting a prejudice against is an affront to this courageous man and to the known facts of history. Let us ask the apologizer this. If Joseph Smith denied the right to the priesthood as a means of currying favor with the world or as a means of satisfying his personal prejudice, then why did he allow to hold membership in the church at all? I'm pretty sure that the actual priesthood ban itself didn't get implemented until after Joseph Smith died. I'm gonna try to look this up just to be sure, but I'm pretty sure it was actually Brigham Young that implemented this, so for him to say that, oh, you don't understand history, when he's literally getting history wrong is a little bit silly. Maybe the author will eventually get into this, but I know that Joseph Smith in his lifetime, when he was trying to run for president, was trying to build it on an anti-slavery platform. I'm actually going to read out of this article I found on the Salt Lake Tribune. I will put it in the description. After the long exodus across the country to the Rocky Mountains, the Latter-day Saints had resettled in the Great Basin where they attracted converts from all over, including the Deep South. The universal nature of Mormonism had welcomed a wide spectrum into the gospel community, Reeve says, including free blacks, white slaveholders, and black slaves, abolitionists, and anti-abolitionists. It was up to Brigham Young and other leaders to sort out how to govern this brew of believers, and the issue of interracial marriage amid fears of race mixing raised its ugly head. In a February 1852 speech before the Utah Territorial Legislature, Young set up a racial hierarchy, drawing on the biblical take of Cain killing his brother Abel, the same story Southern Christians had used to defend slavery. The Lord told Cain that he should not receive the blessings of the priesthood nor his seed until the last of the posterity of Abel had received the priesthood, until the redemption of the earth, Young intoned to the legislators. If there never was a prophet or apostle of Jesus Christ spoke it before, I tell you, this people that are commonly called are the children of old Cain. Were the children of God to mingle their seed with the seed of Cain, it would not only bring the curse of being deprived of the power of the priesthood upon themselves, but entail it upon their children after them, and they cannot get rid of it. So it seems like at the time there were lots of different people of all races who were members of the church, and there wasn't any actual ban in place yet. Some LDS historians, however, draw on different passages to come to alternative conclusions about Young's role. Ronald K. Esplin, a Young biographer and president of the Brigham Young Center Foundation, points to the leader's remarks suggesting he may have had some kind of divine communication on that matter. Oh my God. Clearly, Esplin says, Young believed the ban did not come from him and was not his to change. A man who has the African blood in him cannot hold one jot nor tittle of the priesthood. Why? Because they are the true eternal principles the Lord Almighty had ordained, Young said in the same 1852 speech. Who can help it? Men cannot, the angels cannot, and all the powers of earth and hell cannot take it off. But thus saith the Eternal, I am what I am, I take it off at my pleasure, and not one particle of power can that posterity of Cain have until the time comes he says he will have it taken away. That time will come when they will have the privilege of all we have the privilege of, and more. The historical record is ambiguous, Esplin says. Whether he learned these views from Joseph Smith or whether they came from his experience with interracial marriage or from God, I don't think we know. The LDS Church's own essay, though, does not mention any revelation to Young to establish the ban, but rather only societal influences on the man considered by many to be the Lion of the Lord. The church itself, in its own essay about it, seems to be pointing to this was just Brigham Young. And it would come across as pretty terrible if you were saying that this all came from God and it was God that was implementing this racism rather than just one man, Brigham Young. But getting back to the book, it seems to me that the racist priesthood ban really started with Brigham Young, not Joseph Smith. Surely the popular thing would have been for him to proclaim that no could join the LDS Church. We must keep in mind that in the United States in the 1830s, the unpopular person in society was not the slave owner, but rather the abolitionist. By and large, slavery was still popular during the entire lifetime of the prophet, 1805 to 1844. Rather than his trying to curry favor with non-Mormons over the question, what was really the conduct of the prophet Joseph Smith in this matter? I mean, I'm interested to see if he says anything about how it was actually Brigham Young who implemented these things. In the early 1830s, he wrote and published in the Messenger and Advocate, the church newspaper at Kirtland, Ohio, an editorial suggesting that leading men in the southern states should take measures to liberate the slaves so that the could enjoy the blessings of a free nation. He also invited an abolitionist to give a public speech in Kirtland at a time when abolitionists were generally hated in the North as well as in the South. Do you know what the immediate cause was of the Latter-day Saints being driven out of Independence, Jackson County, Missouri, when they lost hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property and some of them forfeited their lives? It was an editorial published in the LDS newspaper there, the Evening and Morning Star, entitled Free People of Color, and an editorial filler in the same edition of the paper in which the editor noted that, in connection with the wonderful events of this age, much is doing towards abolishing slavery and colonizing the blacks in Africa. This, remember, was published in the slave state of Missouri by a people already being persecuted. Was this done, do you suppose, to curry favor? As soon as this edition was published, the mobs, prodded by the ministers of the Protestant sects there, destroyed the church's printing office, tarred and feathered Bishop Edward Partridge, and began their destruction of the saints' property, finally driving them from the state. In their ultimatum to the Mormons, demanding that they leave or be exterminated, the Missourians declared that the Mormons' policy of allowing them to hold membership in the LDS Church exhibits them in still more odious colors. And at the time of this popular prejudice against the what did the prophet Joseph Smith declare? They have souls and are subjects of salvation. Go into Cincinnati or any city and find an educated who rides in his carriage, and you will see a man who has risen by the powers of his own mind to his exalted state of respectability. The slaves in Washington are more refined than in many high places, and the black boys will take the shine off many of those they brush and wait on. So we're still here talking about things that all happened before Brigham Young became the prophet and before the priesthood ban was implemented. When at the age of 38, the prophet was seeking the presidency of the United States in 1844, 16 years before the beginning of the Civil War, and when most of the nation still favored slavery, he strongly advocated that the be freed. In his political manifesto, Views on the Power and Policy of Government, which was widely published in the spring of 1844, the prophet implored, "Petition also, ye goodly inhabitants of the slave states, your legislators to abolish slavery by the year 1850, or now, and save the abolitionists from reproach and ruin, infamy and shame. Pray Congress to pay every man a reasonable price for his slaves out of the surplus revenue arising from the sale of public lands, and from the deduction of pay from the members of Congress. Break off the shackles from the poor black man and hire them to labor like other human beings, for an hour of virtuous liberty on earth is worth a whole eternity of bondage." The prophet had servants and friends who were devoted to him, recognizing him a champion of their race and rights. It is interesting to note, too, that among the very first company of saints to make the famous Mormon pioneer trek across the plains to Utah, there were 3. Now, in view of the historical facts, can the apologizer reasonably believe that the LDS doctrine enunciated by Joseph Smith on the not holding the priesthood, that this was actuated by his desire to please the public or to satisfy some personal prejudice? If this was not the reason, then what was? From the church itself, it seems like it wasn't Joseph Smith who implemented this. In the church's gospel topics essays under race in the priesthood, it says, "During the first 2 decades of the church's existence, a few black men were ordained to the priesthood. One of these men, Elijah Abel, also participated in temple ceremonies in Kirtland, Ohio, and was later baptized as proxy for deceased relatives in Nauvoo, Illinois. There is no reliable evidence that any black men were denied the priesthood during Joseph Smith's lifetime. In a private church council 3 years after Joseph Smith's death, Brigham Young praised Q. Walker Lewis, a black man who had been ordained to the priesthood, saying, 'We have one of the best elders, an African.' In 1852, President Brigham Young publicly announced that men of black African descent could no longer be ordained to the priesthood, though thereafter blacks continued to join the church through baptism and receiving the gift of the Holy Ghost." So from the church's own website, what the church is putting out there currently right now, it wasn't Joseph Smith. It had nothing to do with Joseph Smith. There were black people going through the church, receiving the priesthood, going through the temple when Joseph Smith was alive and in charge of the church. But then after Joseph Smith had died and Brigham Young had taken over, he then implemented the priesthood ban. So who really is paying attention to the history here, Mr. Stewart? The fact that every doctrine the prophet Joseph announced for the organization and direction of the LDS Church was revealed to him by the Lord. Many were his teachings and practices which displeased the world, but he held fast to them because the doctrines were of divine origin. So the apologizer finds himself in an awkward position, that of not only apologizing for the church, but for God himself. It is a precarious position to be in, to say the least. Oh my God, the irony. Because here we are, him saying that this is Joseph Smith that implemented all of this, but it wasn't Joseph Smith. It was actually God. So if you're arguing this, you're arguing God. And what a silly position you find yourself in. Really? Do you not see the irony in that? Because first of all, according to the church, this wasn't Joseph Smith that implemented this. It was Brigham Young. And second of all, if you truly believe that God is the one who implemented the racist policy, you are in a way more awkward position by claiming that God is racist. If we as members of the church are going to pick and choose among the prophet's teachings and say, this one is of God, we can accept it, but this one is of man, we will reject that, then we are undermining the whole structure of our faith, and for our own personal sake, we cannot afford to do that. Oh my God, I agree with that paragraph. This is one of the things about the church that just is so incredibly inconsistent. He was speaking as a man. He was speaking for God. Prophets and apostles are fallible, but not really, and they always tell us the truth. They will never lead us astray, but also they might, but they don't because it's God. Besides, I have shown that the prophet's own attitude, as demonstrated in both speech and action, was one of fairness and kindness toward the... Alright, I would say we're a good quarter of the way through the book, and we're going to go ahead and stop here because this is getting really, really long. My battery is actually running out, in fact. So we're going to split this up into a few parts so that we can go through this whole book together. But just for where we're at so far, what do you guys think? I'm finding this very interesting because so much of what he says I disagree with, but then there's parts that I actually do agree with, not because I agree with the racism, but because I agree that, because this guy definitely has the view that you can't pick and choose which part of the church to believe in. You can't pick and choose which doctrines and policies you believe are from God and which ones were just created by man. So at least he's consistent, whereas a lot of people who are in the church just are not, and just, you know, cherry pick what they like and don't like and do whatever they want that way. I also find it super interesting that he seems to think and seems to be saying that Joseph Smith was the one who implemented all of this, when the church right now says on their website that no, it was Brigham Young who did this after Joseph Smith's death. Maybe we'll get more into that as we go farther into the book. Maybe he'll talk more about Brigham Young and, you know, when the policy was actually put into place. I guess we'll see as we keep going. So definitely subscribe if you're not already, and ring the notification bell so you know when I upload part 2. That's gonna be it for today. Leave your comments, let me know what you think. I'm super interested to hear what you have to say on all this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and a special thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel. I really, really appreciate it. And a special thank you to Anthony Guthrie at Keegar, Craig Call, Doug Davis, Mormonland, The Guiltiest Place on Earth, Jake Nunyabiz, Jason Wilkins, Melissa Jane, and the Exmo Candle Company for supporting at the Demon tier on my Patreon. If you would like to support the channel, you can find links to do that in the description below, as well as links to all my other social media if you want to see more content. And don't forget that I have a new channel unrelated to church or religion, where I just do things like vlogs and story times and talk about just random stuff going on in my life, as well as Muppet content. I will be putting a vlog about her on the channel so you can get to know her better. I also have a vlog up there about my other dog Atlas and his battle with parvovirus. So, you know, if you want to see more of this face, and more importantly, if you want to see more of this face, go follow me on my other channel. The link is in the description. Thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
No secrets you're keeping, these promises strong as a spell. I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you, that's for sure. Never have to close the door.